Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look. Y'all been patient with me. So what does 434 birds look like? So all the little chickies. So I'm actually going to try to step over there. I have to maneuver over one of our barrier walls, but give me just a moment. So 434, okay? So they're resting right now. So that's what you're seeing. There's nothing wrong with them. They are resting. And when baby birds rest with 100% of their physical being. So sometimes when you're starting chicks and you look at the chicks, you're like, is it even alive? Well, most of the time, yes, the chick is still alive, okay? So some things to note. The biggest group of chicks that we've ever started here was about 300. So 434, this is the biggest group of chicks that we've ever started. Our barn is 30 foot by 30 foot total floor space. We've made this short barrier wall to leave the birds a total space on both sides of these yellow crates, a total space of about 25 foot by 30 foot. Here's a good example of, I said to you, you know, when they rest, like there's one still laying down there. They rest, well, now it just moved, reacted. They rest with their whole bodies. But they will have, this flock will actually have all of this space, 25 foot by 30 foot. We're going to actually do a little bit of an adjustment here. This is Tanner. Hi, Tanner. We're way close up on Tanner. We're going to tell Tanner, go back over the wall. We don't want you in the brooder, Tanner. We don't want you in the brooder. Tanner's not quite a year old yet. He's a little Dachshund, and he is a tremendous little dog. He's actually our middle son's dog, but he's a good boy. But he's learning, you know, to respect where do we want him. And he's being ornery. Tanner, you have to get down. You're not helping me right now, okay? So let me try again, y'all. Tanner, no help. So he's actually very good help with chickens, but there are times we want to tell him, don't go in that space or whatever. So anyway, so these birds will have this entire space. Patience. Puppies require patience. Come here, Tanner. Maybe I'll hang on to him. So these birds will have this entire space, y'all, okay? And they're going to need it. They're going to need it. And this is probably the biggest point that we would emphasize when you're starting chicks, especially if you're learning. And when I say starting chicks, in this instance, I am referring specifically to these kind of meat birds. When we're starting Cornish rock cross meat chickens, they grow quickly, okay? They grow really quickly. And they don't stop growing quickly. They grow quickly in the beginning, and they grow even quicker as we get further into production. So this is like one of those situations where as soon as you get things set up the way that you think they should be set up, then their needs are going to change because their size is going to change. So that's probably the biggest point I would emphasize with meat chickens. Plan and prepare, but be ready to adjust your plans and be prepared to implement changes. Okay, so I can give you some real life examples with that. Remember, I said this is the biggest group that we've started. So I was kind of basing my plans for them for how to set up their space. I was kind of basing my plans for them on reference points of like 200 birds at a time, because I was kind of thinking of this group of 400 plus. If we divide them in half, it's like two groups of 200. So I was kind of thinking of if we would divide this group in half and set it up similar to the way we would set up for 200 birds, then perhaps we're going to be, you know, right on target with how we set up their space and how many waters we provide and how many feeders we provide. We'll work our way down this way. we haven't gone down here. So in fact, and also the other thing was how many heat lamps we provide. So in fact, we set things up and then found that once we moved the birds in, like we didn't allow nearly enough resources in our planning. But fortunately, we have the space and we have the resources to be able to adjust real quickly to what they needed. So a couple examples of that. Initially, so we actually have 12 total heat lamps suspended here. So initially, we only had 6 of these turned on. And we were in hopes that they would spread out under those 6 lamps. This is cute. There's some vegetation growing in the gap, in a little tiny gap there, and they're curious about it. But so, you know, we thought 6 lamps and hopefully they'll spread out under those 6 lamps. Well, in fact, no, they didn't. They were ignoring actually these 2 lamps, and they were clumping up under the lamps on that end. And that happens. That's something that most flocks do, and eventually they kind of sort it out. But then as the night went on, they weren't sorting it out. So we decided to turn on the second row of lamps. So in fact, this group that we thought, well, we'll start them with 6 lamps, ended up utilizing all 12 of the lamps right away. We had kind of expected, well, let's start with 6, and then as they grow, we'll add the second row. But it ended up being better. Look at how cute. All around the water. Ended up being better to start with all 12 on, okay? So then also like waters, initially we said, we're just gonna put a lot of waters right down the center here. Well, that worked, that was fine, but then what we found up there on the far end of the heat lamps, because we only had the 6 on to start with, and then we turned on the 12, all 12 of them, and we had these waters all up the middle, we actually found that the birds were getting really crowded up there in the center between all of the lights, because we had the space filled in with these water dispensers. So we ended up having to move some of the water dispensers further out. And then with feeders, we thought we'll just put the feeders all down this side. Well, that ended up not working great, and we moved like a feeder here, and there's actually a feeder there. So we ended up moving those around. So another thing about where you're brooding your chicks that is notable when you start them is that it's really a warm space, but your chicks want it to be warm. They need to have the ambient temperature all around them at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So like even as I'm in here recording, it's warm. You know, I'm breaking a sweat because we want to target warmth into their area because they want that. Little tiny baby chicks are not capable of their own temperature regulation internally when they're first hatched and in their first few days. So they need a little bit of time for their bodies to develop that ability. So that's why initially they really rely on us to make sure that they have a warm, draft-free area where they can experience targeted warmth that will keep them comfortable. But they also, in our experience, they also need to have room to leave that targeted warmth in case they get too hot. And so there was an example, it's lifted its head now, but there was an example of one I was going to show y'all that, like when I first looked at it, my thought was, is that one still living? And then as soon as some birds ran beside it, it lifted its head up and it's fine. But you will at times question, you know, are the birds okay? And like I said, most of the time they are. Now occasionally, do we ever lose hatchlings to mortality? Yes, occasionally we do. Sometimes there's runts that could have been from conditions beyond our control that occurred during incubation prior to hatching. And sometimes there can be just random things that happen. For example, if they're trying to get warm, sometimes birds will crawl under other birds. They'll end up getting smashed. And so that's why we want to provide, even though it seems like an awful lot of heat lamps, that's one reason we want to provide a lot of spots of targeted warmth so that they will spread out and not pile up on one another. But these chicks are really looking good. So 434 chicks. We're about 24 hours in. So the awesome things was that all the chicks survived transport. They were all alive when I got them out of the boxes. All the chicks survived move-in, and all the chicks have made it to just about the 24-hour in mark. So out of 434 chicks, it is expected at some point in production we will probably experience some mortality in the flock, but we hope that most or all of these chicks make it to finish. This is a production livestock project. They will be processed for poultry. So they're going to be processed into a wholesome, delicious food product. And that's why we raise these chickens. And that's what these Cornish rock cross meat chickens really are bred for. And it's selective breeding that gets us the outcome, the result of this kind of chicken that does three things really well. It grows rapidly, it converts feed to meat efficiently, and it distributes the meat into the chicken breast, the thighs, and the drumsticks. And those are the cuts that a lot of our clients really prefer for their chicken that they want to serve in their household. So some things to finish up on here with starting the chicks. Give them the temperatures they want. However you can make that happen is great and works for your chickens. But first week, our chicks want an ambient temperature of about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. You can measure it with a thermometer if you want to, but you can also just observe their behavior. If they're staying well distributed, pretty evenly spread out throughout their space, then you know that you've got the temperature pretty well right for them. If you're seeing them panting, looking uncomfortable, maybe they're too hot. If you're seeing them pile up on each other, huddle up, and appear cold, then they're too cold and we need to make an adjustment. But first week, 90 degrees Fahrenheit is just about what they want. When you move them in, dip their beaks in water. It imprints on them that they can get water from the dispensers. It imprints on them that you're their handler, and it also starts their digestive system in the best possible way. Then let them move in, let them get settled. We don't put solid food in until about 2 hours after they've moved in. We start with baby feeder trays like these. They do have lids. We have the lids detached for now. We just want them in the beginning to get the idea that they're going to find their food in these trays for the time being. And when they want to eat, we want it easy for them to be able to get the food. Probably definitely within the first week, but probably within a few days, we'll attach the lids back onto them and they'll have to put their heads through the access holes to get to the food. And we'll use the baby waters and baby food dispensers as long as we can before we switch into larger ones. And they are eating a 22% protein crumble that's called a start to finish meat bird food, and this is manufactured by Kalmbach Feeds of Ohio. We don't get anything from Kalmbach. I sure wish they would send some feed our way, but for the time being, we just tell y'all that so you know what we're feeding them. So tune in again, give us a like and a thumbs up, and we hope you'll subscribe. And please source as much of your food as locally as you possibly can, wherever local is for you. Please support local agriculture. Please eat real food. That's what's best for you and your family. And you can produce what you're able to, or just source it from farmers in your local area. So we'll just let the camera roll up here to the next minute and just give you views of the meat birds. Thanks for joining us. And we topped 900 subscribers. We're working our way towards 1,000. Please help us out with that, with a subscribe. We greatly appreciate it.